So I'm going to start the capping on the stab. So to speed up the process of doing this, I'm going to do all of this in one shot. You could do it separately, but it would take, a lot of days to do that. So I'll do all this whole piece here on the front in one go, just so I can reduce the amount of time. So in order to do that, you basically got to get these sections, cut off properly. So really, just to cheat on that one, I'm going to line the corner of this up because I'm going to leave this long. I'm going to reduce the amount of cut I got to take off the front. So I basically put the corner there, and I use this next leading edge piece, and I just hold this in place to kind of define that angle. I can quite easily draw that on there, and I'll be able to make that cut. Alright, so that's going to look like so. Just double check that it's right. We'll come back and just touch it with a sandpaper real quick just to make sure. So I'm going to make that cut. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do it on both. And these pieces are square, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to do that on both. I'm going to cut that on my scroll saw. That way I don't have to repeat that same measurement for the other side, and I'll just be able to flip it over, use it on the other side, and it'll save a bunch of time. So there's the first piece cut. It's not, exactly perfect, but it's pretty close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the polyurethane on there, tape that on, and then quickly sand that, and then I'll be ready for this piece, and I'll do the same on it. So I'm just going to show you the polyurethane just once. So I do just put it on the wood. I do spread it the whole way. Just very thin layer. Doesn't have to be super thick. Just enough that you can see the wood kind of wet. There you go. I mean, that stuff expands pretty good, and it really bonds well to everything. So we're just going to put that on there. We're going to roughly center it up best as we can. I'm going to set that just on the, pretty close. I'm going to touch that up with a bit of sandpaper. I just really made it close just to get it as close as I can. So it'll be like that. I'm just going to tape this on here now. Couple pieces of masking tape. So there, that's what that looks like. Now, just so we get a nice super joint, I'm just going to very quickly sand this down. So you can see that's pretty much exact. So I'm doing the same thing now. I'm going to take my leading edge. Now there is not a lot of material left on the bone here for this. So the next step is to do the leading edge. So there's not enough material to do like a scarf joint on there where you overlap it. So I'm really just going to do a butt joint out here. I'm probably just going to mark that bit of an angle, I guess. And then I'll flip it over and see if I can't. I gotta have to mate it up the other direction. So I'm just going to mark that off perpendicular on this one. These are my square. I'm just going to cut this with a handsaw. So that one's going to go like so, and this one's going to have to mate up to it. So we're going to have to shape this one down to match this one. But we'll glue this one on first. Now, you kind of match the angle of this other one. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line it up. I'm going to line the top up, basically this corner to that corner, and then I'm just going to mark on the inside where they overlap, and that's going to be essentially my cut line. Kind of looks like that, and I'm just gonna use my sanding block to do this. I'm not gonna bother cutting it on the saw. So we'll trial fit that as necessary. Yeah, it looks pretty good there. Looks pretty good there. I mean, any little gap we can always use a bit of wood filler down the road, and that polyurethane is gonna fill in there anyways. So again, we're gonna glue this one up. So that's pretty much all the external capping on the stab, ready to sit there and set up. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other side now, the exact same process. So there we go, both stab halves are done, taped up, ready to set up. So we'll let those cure up overnight. So much like our rudder, our stabs, also the capping is on. I've removed the tape. So the same process, I'm going to clean up this end and this end and this end, and then I'm going to go in with my plane and plane all this to rough shape. I'm not going to round leading edge, I'm just going to plane it to a bit of a square. For now, I don't like to round them early on because chances are during the build process you bump it or you do something like that, and then you have to fix a perfectly rounded leading edge, whereas if you've just left it square, you're probably going to sand through that anyways. So I'll go ahead, I'll do all that work. So there's the first side, basically done. Doesn't take too long. There's your tip, trailing edge. You know, there's the seams where the joint is on that angled leading edge. You know, and then the root, and that's basically the shape you're left with before we go ahead and really finish that off. So you can see why I want to do the alignment first. You know, there is a lot of shaping. It would be pretty easy to have this tip, you know, maybe in the wrong spot, or you drop it and you dent it or something, and then you've sort of lost that original geometry. Also, even if you're going to cut the elevator all the way through the tip, do the tip first. That way you preserve the overall airfoil shape, so it's a little bit easier after the fact to see your center line. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave a tip. This is going to come out and get cut off here somewhere, so I'm going to leave this tip on here. I'm going to go ahead and finish up the other side now. So there we are. Both the left and the right done. Same result, really just roughed out to shape. So they turn out pretty good. It does not take that long. You know, there's maybe 20 minutes worth of work here. That's why I use the planer and not sand at all. You can see the pile of wood that you would have to sand down if you did that all with sanding, and you would have one big mess. Not only that, if you're breathing it in, it's not good for you. So always wear a mask when you're doing that work. So I got the adjuster parts out. So these are the parts that come in the kit. So there's the little mounting blocks, the two stab adjusters, which are typical of a gator style. Two set screws to clamp down on the pin. And those fit in that recess in the stab. Now, two ways you can do this. one would be to have these blocks in here first. And this on the outside. Now this actually fits perfect in this orientation, that cutout, right? So that would be like that, and the adjuster would be inside on that plate. Alternatively, and you have to trim this down a little bit, you'd fit this in first, and I haven't trimmed it down yet, but you'd fit it in deep there first, and then use these just to support that in place, and the adjuster would sit sort of recessed back in there like that. That's the way I'm going to do it. And the reason for that is I've had adjusters over the years, these little set screws strip, and then you can't tighten them down, and you need to replace the adjuster. So if you've done it this way, where the adjuster's inside, it looks really neat and tidy, right? It's all covered over nice, can't see anything, but you have no access to replace that adjuster if need be. And what I find for pattern is, more often than not, I want to be able to access parts, to be able to change them very easily, even if it's at a contest. You know, I actually had one of these strip out at the World Championships in Italy, and I had to change the adjuster. So it does happen, and it'll probably happen at the most inopportune time. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to clean these up just so they fit all the way down there, and then I'm going to show you how I glue them in accurately, in order that they fit nice on and off the fuse. So they don't take much, just a little bit of sanding just so they get all the way down there. So just to give you an idea, that's how much I'm taking off. So it's just kind of a hair around the whole perimeter. So I got a bit more fore and aft adjustment and up and down. And I'll explain why when we actually go to mount it on the stab. Okay, so I got both my parts done. So what I'm going to go do now is I'm going to put the adjusters on. There's already holes in there, kind of pilot holes, so I'm just going to use those, drive these screws through here. There's both our adjuster plates. Now I've got a fair bit of screws sticking out the back. I'm just going to go ahead and leave those. I don't really care. They'll jam into the foam, won't matter. So now I'm going to go ahead and work on getting these set up. So you could just glue these straight in right now if you felt like it. You could just take that in there and slam that down there and you'd be done. But there's no guarantee that it would line up to the pin when you go to put it together. So I'm going to show you a different way to think about doing that. So I've put that assembly on the pin, and if you remember from before, we had that anti-rotation pin just flush with the inside of this foam. That's where we cut it, right? So I've set it so that that pin is just slightly recessed inside the wood. So what I've done by doing this is, you know, now I know when this is glued into the stab that I got a full range of adjustment, both up and down, on my incidents. I don't put it on, glue it in, and then put it on and find out, oh, I have to use up all my range of adjustment just to get it close to my actual zero starting incidence point. So I've done this for both sides, and the screws are poking up, but they're just going to jam into the fuse or into the foam. So I got my stab half here. Now we'll throw this on. You know, and if it needs to be adjusted to fit, that's fine. We can come in there and we can sand off whatever side needs to be adjusted in order to fit. So we go along and see, does that fit in there? So it does. And this is going to push right into the foam, so that we're basically bottomed there now. So now you want to check to make sure that your center line of your 0 point matches up with your stab. And in my case, it's pretty much spot on. So we can do the same for the other side, and then what we'll do is we'll put some polyurethane glue, just spread it around on here, on the screws. We'll spread it around there, and we'll put both stab halves on, and I'm just going to tape them in place. And then when that's done and set up, we can come back in and put these supports in basically on these sides, And that's what it will be, the final look of this. And then these really are going to hold that thing in place forever. It's never going to come out. That way we got a nice, well-aligned adjuster, and it's serviceable. We can pop that thing out of there, change it if need be, if we ever have an issue with it. So some people may notice I got no holes in here. How am I going to get this thing off of here? Well, I know the hole is, or the set screw's 15 millimeters off from the edge of the fuse. I measured it, and I know where the pin is. So when I want to go take them off, I'm just going to draw a line out and just route her in a little hole about 15 millimeters away. It's not that critical. I mean, maybe smarter to do it beforehand, but doing it after is fine too. Okay, so I've pulled these out. I did put the holes in. I was able to get those out. So you'll see where it's at now. This is why, maybe you can see there, you'll see how this one's displaced a bit forward. So if you were to just put that even in that hole, you would be off position on your pin. So then it wouldn't fit properly. And on the left side, you can see the same thing. It's basically kind of at the front end. And in fact, this one didn't even, you know, it kind of really squished in that foam, and it didn't get quite all the way to the bottom. But it'll get well supported when we put those other former pieces in there. So we'll do that next. Just to give you an idea how well this fits now, I'll just slide this on here. It goes on there. Now, I loosened off the top, and because I did set it to the instance, I know my stab instance is basically bang on. So there's the fit on that stab. I don't know how you're going to get much better than that. Okay, ready to start doing the root capping. So I did finish off the holes both sides. For the adjusters, I just ballparked where they are. It's close enough. So I'm going to use the stab itself to, this is an 1/8 inch sheet of balsa, to mark essentially the shape of that root rib. I got those two marked off and cut these both out just with a knife, utility knife. So there's the two ribs. They're going to fit like so. So before we get too far, I need to know where I'm going to cut that out, and also the tube. So I'm just going to kind of quickly mark the center of those. And it doesn't have to be exact, but you know, if I'm going to put my rib something like this, there, and that's where those 2 points are going to be. So at least I know where to start cutting. And I mean, I'll use a Dremel and cut them out gently afterwards. I'm just going to cut a big circle in the top one there, and one for the stab tube. You also want to mark where not to glue. Obviously, we're not going to glue, you know, essentially in this area here, or in this area about there, right? So we're going to glue kind of around that. We're going to try not to get glue too much in here. I mean, you want to get close because you definitely want it to bond around, but what I'll probably do is maybe when I get here, I'll put that glue on this surface instead of on this surface, and that way I get it a little more precise. So I'm going to glue these both up, and I'll tape them down just like we do with all the other ones, and we'll come back later and cut those out and finish shape them. Okay, so I've glued these in first. These are the two little formers. Make sure they don't protrude. If you gotta adjust the thickness of them, that's fine. Make sure they don't stick out past the edge of the foam. I've also put glue kind of around that area by the tube there, since it's easier to control it this way than putting it on the root rib. I've glued up my root rib, but I've kind of left out that tube area and that area there you can see pretty clear. So I'll fit this on and tape it up. So that doesn't get deformed, I'm going to use a piece of, this is actually the wing trailing edge stock that comes with the kit. I'm going to use a piece of that just to tape on top of that just to support it when gluing. So there's the first stab done, taped up, ready to go. Looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other one and we'll let those cure up. Okay, so the glue is set up on the root of the stabs. So I'm going to very quickly clean that up with the planer, and then I'm going to open up where the stab tube is, and then open up a hole here where the adjuster is. There's that back one. Just very loosely done with the Dremel tool and a sanding drum. And there's the adjuster in there, accessible, removable, fairly neat and tidy. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to the other stab half, and these will be done, just waiting to cut off the elevator. Okay, so we got our two stab halves done up. Finish them both up. Same hole, same adjuster access point on both. So really that kind of completes everything on here with the exception of cutting out this angle and cutting out the actual surface. But we'll do that a bit later. So you go with an 1/8 inch root rib on each side. That tube is actually exactly the right length. I did take it out and double check it. It's basically a perfect fit in there. So that is just total luck. Normally you have to cut them a bit. What I would do if I had to cut it is basically I'd have the one stab all the way to the root, the other one would stick out a bit. I'd measure this distance in between the gap, and basically I'd cut that same distance off the end of the tube, and then that way it would close right up. But in this case, it's bang on the money. Now this is the final gap between the sides. So there's the left, and there's the right. So that's with no foam and no anything. So I mean, once we put our foam and everything on there and we suck that thing tight to the fuse, it is going to be very nice. It'll look super pro, just like it came out of a pro builder shop. Everybody will really like your airplane. So really we got everything else done back here. We got our farmers in, we got our stab tube in, we got all the glass work done, we got our support for our tail wheel, we've got our servo wire guide in, our anti-rotation pin in, our stabs done and checked. There's really nothing left to do back here. But I advise you to make sure, because once this is in, it's in. There's no easy way to get it out. If you did need to get access back through here, you'd have to cut some holes or something, or maybe cut it out altogether. So just make sure, think about it before you put it in. It's really very simple. The piece that comes with the kit is pretty close. What I've done, I've already kind of pre-shaped this. So what I've done is I've put a bit of taper on each side. If you don't do that, when we clamp it, you'll find that there'll just be a slight flare at the back here. So taper it a little bit. Maybe you can see that I've just tapered it ever so slightly, both sides. And it also helps to slide it in. You gotta shape the top. So probably take it down a little bit and shape it like that. Just helps to go in. You trial fit this a few times. I have cut a little bit of, or sanded a bit of a recess in here for the tail wheel block, and the same thing for the former. Just very subtly sanded that, just to get the fit, just so I can get it flush. So go ahead, take your time, you know, fit this thing in and out a bunch of times, make sure it's good. Sand the inside here, so a bit of thunder grip, sand all that down so you're taking off any molding agent and whatnot. So that's all done. And I'm going to use polyurethane glue to glue that in. So I want to keep these sides from splaying out. To do that, I'm going to use our aluminum square extrusions again. So I'm just going to clamp these on with just a pair of grip clamps like this, top and bottom. Once that's in there, just to hold that thing perfectly straight. And that'll make sure, you know, that the sides match up. I'm not going to put a ton of force on it, just enough to keep everything straight in line and make sure that, that this doesn't bow out from the glue. So we basically got the glue all in there. It's going to kind of squish it in as we go. It'll expand enough on its own, I think, to fill in whatever gaps. Any little gap we do at the top or bottom, no big deal. We're going to fill that in before we paint it. So just going to go ahead, slide this in. Chances are to get that shape right, you've probably trial fit this a million times prior to doing this, like I have. So you know that it'll just go right in there. There. So perfectly flush, doesn't really matter that much. I'm going to bevel this for the rudder hinge line anyway, so if you don't have this exactly right, no big deal. It's going to get all sanded down. So we take our clamps here, our square tubing. I'm just going to hold it at the top, try to get it, you know, just on the edge, just so it's contacting the entire tailpost. Little pressure, not tons. Just hold that in place. Slide the bottom. And if you want to put one more kind of in the middle, just to make sure. There. Make sure you got good contact everywhere, you don't have any gaps or anything. Like I say, if there's a bit of gap up here, no big deal. We're going to fill that bit of gap down here, no big deal. We're also going to fill that. So we're going to leave that set up overnight. Or if you're doing this, you know, first thing in the morning, it'll probably be, you know, usually this polyurethane's dry, probably 3-4 hours. It'll be okay to take apart.